this is your opportunity, is understanding what's happening in these next couple of years, so you can also prepare for what's coming up in 2025, 26, 27, 28, as we come back and repeat these same 5 years again in intensity.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. Today, I have with me Inventor Lee Wheelbarger, discussing changes in our atmosphere, moving out into the future, what you can expect on how our global weather will shift.
You're not going to see a warming during that period. If anything, you're going to see eruptions out of the sun during that period. You're going to have CME activity during that period, because that is when you've got two separate magnetic fields that are going at a phase in one part of the sun, and another two magnetic fields that are going at a phase in another part of the sun, and they are slightly off from each other, and they are going to be fighting back and forth, creating some extreme turbulence within the sun. And so I would say that during that period of time is when we would most likely see more Carrington type events. So that is when we will see these strong regions of magnetic instability. So when we do see things that start to look like a sunspot coming around, that is one of these regions of magnetic instability, and that's what caused these flares that we saw this year, ejecting out of the backside of the sun, that would have shut down this planet had we been in the line of fire of that CME that came out of the backside of the sun. I mean, that thing ran shock waves all the way across the sun, basically created a tsunami wave that you could see go across the face of the sun. So, that is the worry that I have for that period. Yes, it will be cold, because when those magnetic fields are out of phase, you don't have the magnetic fields that are required on the face of the sun to have these sunspots and be flaring and so on and so forth. So it will be cooler temperatures. There will be more cosmic rays. There will be more galactic cosmic rays. The coronal holes will be pretty much covering the face of the sun by that period of time. When you look at the sun in certain spectrums through the SDO, it will look like a dark piece of coal that just has a little bit of embers flickering in it here and there. Only on the lower temperature spectrums in the SDO will you still see substantial activity. And as you look at it, the frequencies of light will shift that way also within the light spectrum, because the light that we see from the sun across that spectrum is emanated from all of those different temperature ranges across the face of the sun. So that actually the color of the sun will become slightly more yellow as we go into it, even as appearance. And then additionally, as we have additional cosmic rays coming in with the additional cloud nucleation, that will act as somewhat of a filter and will cause a little bit of reddening or orangening tint to the sun itself. And, people go, well, Lee, how can you see all of this stuff that's going on? Well, you can go outside and see it in the sky. If you, if you're older and you remember the sky, how dark blue it used to be, and now it kind of like has a real light white haze to it. And if you look off in the horizon all the time, it always looks like there's a kind of a slight haze out around on the horizon. Now, I do realize that there are parts of the globe that have less humidity than where I'm at, and so it may not be as prevalent there. But in where they have contrails and so on and so forth, the different levels of the atmosphere, they will see that with increased size of the contrails, with that nucleation coming in, and you can look at the sky and you almost see fingerprints as the clouds are forming. And don't look at the big fluffy clouds, you can't see it there. You have to look at the real thin layers of clouds that are just forming, and you can actually see the electrical connection between the sun and the earth and the magnetic fields and so on and so forth as those particles are coming down in and they're interacting, and the nucleation is taking place right there in the sky.
And speaking of cycles, life and death rhythms of ancient empires, climatic cycles influence rule of dynasties, a predictable pattern of religion, war, prosperity, and debt. This book available on Amazon. The Life and Death Rhythms of Ancient Empires outlines the flow of history from 3000 BC into the Wolf Minimum, 1400 AD, identifying factors causing the rise and fall of dominant cultures, which then could be roughly forecast in terms of hundreds of years. A review of ancient history provides the basis for a glimpse into the future. This century's global temperature increases, which so excites environmentalists, can be shown to be part of a 1,000-year climate cycle. Research has shown that periods of hot and dry climate or cold and dry climate have effects on human behavior. Dominant, prosperous societies have occurred at roughly 200-year intervals, which can suggest timelines for societies into the future, enabling a forecast that the USA might lose world dominance in 2040. If you want to support this broadcast, click the link in the description box to explore more about life and death rhythms of ancient empires and climatic cycles influence rule of dynasties. It's available in both paperback and Kindle versions and lays out succinctly where we're going in the next 20 years in terms of the Grand Solar Minimum.
Sometimes it looks like neural fibers. If you've ever looked at, the way the nerves go through the human body or what have you, how you have the little nacelles and the tentacles that come out from it, and then you have more cells. It kind of looks like that in some cases. In other times, it will kind of look like little fingerprints up there, and you'll actually see them all forming together. You got to just sit there and watch them, but you want to look at the very thin layers of the clouds, and you'll see that formation taking place right in front of you. And, we watch it, we film it, and we see it basically every day. And we've continued to, monitor it with, weather stations and with solar systems to monitor the power output of the sun through that with cloud cover and, clear days and taking readings then. So, we take a very close look at what's going on and see these changes taking place. And you can look at the increase in galactic cosmic rays and cosmic rays that are coming in. That's all being documented all over the world. We're not just here in the United States. So there's a lot of changes that are coming forward. We can see these changes. We can see that in the time period you're talking about between the two separate magnetic fields going out of phase with each other, a few years apart from each other. That period right there will be a turbulent period, and that is the period of time that I am most concerned with between now and eternity, is that window of time, and actually between now, that period of time, and 5 years after. So that is where I see the most highest probability of these regions of magnetic instability rearing their head and causing CMEs and other things that can be devastating to this planet and others. So that's what I see. That's when it's going to be ugly, is 5 to 6 years before that, 5 6 years thereafter. Back to you, Dave.
Okay, because we're starting to see some changes in the sun, and you notice, what was it, about 2.5 weeks ago, the solar wind just was about 3 times higher than normal for a day, and it just was out of nowhere. They hadn't seen wind speeds this high. Usually it's 600-700 kilometers per second, right? But this thing was pushing it, well over a million, 2.1 million approximately. It happened for just a day or so, but nobody could explain what it was, where it came from. It ramped up to 1.2 million kilometers per second, and that was it. And then it jumped again, and then it jumped back down again. It was something so strange that we're already starting to see changes in the sun, things coming. And there's also, when you're talking about electric universe type of things, we have our own sun that's just right next to us. We have our own star that's within our solar system. But when we're talking about Birkeland currents going out to other systems, is there also a drawdown or a reduction in power out on these other star systems that's leading to ours? Because ours is just not a static system that sits in its own little bubble, unaffected by anything else. I mean, what else is going on beyond our solar system out there into other star systems and other galaxies? It would just stay within our own galaxy, but another star that's close to it that's connected by Birkeland current along the same field flow. I mean, is there a shutdown somewhere further down the line as well? And is this affecting other solar systems and other stars within our local galactic region? How far does this go? And it really, on these ice age cycles or cycles that are going out into multi-thousand years, our sun can only go into such a low state on its own. You're talking about canceling waves, and okay, they can all just cancel out to zero, but that's about as low as zero can go. There has to be another driver behind that's pushing it even lower, that's cutting off primer field, something like this going on in the sun, but there's another connectivity electrically to something else it has to be going to a lower state that's bringing about some of these changes. Well, you talked about the 400,000 year glaciation, but within that itself, glaciation cycles on the 100,000 year are at their own rate, but when you look back in time, you see a spike where one of those is a grand glaciation cycle, which usually occurs around on the 400,000 year level itself, where the prior 3 full-blown glaciation, 2-mile thick ice type of events are at a certain level, but then one on the fourth one is completely above everything else in terms of coolness and intensity. And then, even within these longer 100,000, 500,000 year cycles, there's grand glaciation cycles, just like there's a grand solar minimum. So what's the flip switch? If the sun's going into zero activity, fine, but then there has to be something else that can then flip it even into a lower activity state that ushers in and pushes our Earth into grand glacier, full-blown glaciation cycles. Electromagnetically connection elsewhere. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it depends upon whose theory you look at, and
electric universe.
Right. Well, with electric universe, and what Wolf Witche is saying is that the sun has a primer field, and if the energy stream through that primer field diminishes by so much at a certain point, that entire plasmasphere, being our sun, will change state to a lower glow mode. And at that point, the sun's output power would drop dramatically, and we would very quickly drop into an ice age. If that takes place, there is no doubt that the planet will go into an ice age. We are already cooling. The sun's output power is already dropping significantly. If you look at some papers that are being put out, they will tell you that the sun's output power is dropping faster than any time in the last 9,300 years. If you look at the long-term trends, we should be dropping, but not that fast. There has to be a point of where we pull out of this drop. If you look going back to the Maunder minimum and the Dalton minimum and so on and so forth, we should start pulling out here pretty soon if we're going to stick with that type of a curve, but we haven't done that. In fact, we've actually accelerated beyond, as far as the drop-off, into a much steeper rate. So it looks like we are definitely going to go cooler than a Maunder minimum type of event, especially because of all of the additional aerosols that we're putting off into the atmosphere from number 2 bunker that ships are using, and Jet A from all the airliners, and the exhaust from all of the cars and all of the factories and so on and so forth. All of that stuff in the atmosphere is basically food for these cosmic rays to come in and feed upon, to create even more aerosols in the atmosphere, to create even more cloud nucleation. We definitely are in a cooling trend. Looks like we will be in a cooling trend for a good period of time, and it's going to get much cooler. So as far as if we go into that state, that would be devastating. Some people have hypothesized that that would take place between 30 and 40% of the regular solar wind speed, which when you look at the Ulysses missions and their measurements of the solar wind speed and how the solar wind was emanating out of the sun, and it actually looks like there is energy coming in through the top of the sun and going out through the bottom of the sun. And the sun itself is a plasma pinch point, according to things like Sapphire Project, which is part of the EU theory. They are able to control that sphere by applying energy to it at different levels, different currents and voltages and pressures and gases. And they can actually create it what really looks like a miniature sun and emulates what our sun does. And they've been able to see that, during certain periods when their sphere changes from one state to another, it has the ability to emit a significant EMP that would be extremely detrimental to all of the electronics on this planet, especially those facing the sun at the time. There's a real threat of that depending upon whose research you look at. I believe there is a threat of that from the research that I've looked at, from everything that I've been able to gather from Sapphire and Fouché and other people, and then all of the classes I've taken on plasma physics. Because when I first started studying this, I was not an expert in plasma by any stretch of the imagination. After taking all the courses and looking through all the research and seeing their findings and what other experts are looking at and saying about it, there is a possibility of that. So, when that will take place, nobody knows. But when it does take place, it will be pretty much instantaneous and really ugly, and you won't have to worry about watching it on the news because you'll be able to see it yourself.
Imagine if one of those events happens during the middle of winter in a northern hemisphere, when they're already in electrical grids stretched anyway. Imagine what could happen at that point. Having a major earthquake on a seismic zone in New Madrid in the middle of summer is still, you're not going to have to contend with the temperature so much except for the heat, but the same rules apply. No electricity, no water. No electricity. Most people, I'm not going to say most, but many, cook with electricity. I mean, a lot of people run their entire existence on electricity. If that disappears, what happens? I mean, we need electricity to keep pumping water, literally from a city. We need it to keep the gas lines open. There's so many things that just stop on a dime with the electrical grid disturbances. And, talking about a reset in history and society, you just have to imagine, go back several thousand years. Do you really think that there was a society that was more advanced, or at least equally advanced, and then something happened at the same duration where they were pounded by all these earth changes? And think about something, if I left a car out in a forest, it would disappear in probably 200 or 300 years. There would be no remnant of a car left. It would be completely consumed. And again, cities, wherever you go, if you leave a city, Mayan ruins are a good example. 1,800 years, and you can barely even find the things. You got to use satellites now to find the rest of the ruins, the ones that weren't on the edges of the rainforest, that were super easy to find, but the ones that were really deep in the forest. Imagine if that were a city, and most of our buildings are made out of steel. That entire society would be consumed. So you have to think about what would be left if people just migrate out of an area and come back 20,000 years later. Really, what would be the remnants left of a city? Almost everything would be consumed by the earth, especially if it was made of metals. And, most of the buildings we put up these days are nothing like a megalithic structure. Nothing is a megalith that we're building today. So what was built in megalithic terms of building construction with those 100-ton blocks, whatever the size they were, compared to what we're building now, they might find maybe one girder foundation pillar of a highway or something, maybe, but almost everything else would have disappeared. So when you look at the fragility of our society, nothing's built to last. Everything is just in time. Build it as quickly as you can. You know that it's the property values are raised. People will sell out. They're going to destroy the building and put up a new one. That's the building method, at least in China and so many other places across the planet. It's just a rush to put it up. The quality was not meant to last. You know, when you look at things that were built in the 1940s, 1950s, those were things that were made durable. The appliances, those were made you buy it once in your lifetime and you never need to buy another one again. But in today's society, everything is just instant consumption, instant throwaway. So you can only imagine how fragile everything is comparatively. If we had some of these same events coming in the 1950s, think about the lack of, transistors and different things that we had to drive our cars. I mean, almost every car would still run if these CMEs were to come at this time. But now almost every car is going to stop. I mean, how many cars will be out on the roads to even deliver things into the city, or trucks, diesel, 18-wheel rigs out there, do you think are from the 1950s and still on the roads, 1940s that would still run? So even if a CME comes down, how many of these things that we rely on, trains, how many of them do you think are still from the steam engine era that had no computerized parts inside there at all, nothing driving?
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. Since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. There's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So when I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline, we just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
We are so fragile at the time, and your home going out without power is one thing. There's ways to mitigate that. An emergency measure in the winter is to go to your basement. It's the warmest place in your house. A lot of people freeze to death in their house when they could have gone to the basement and stayed alive. These are the simple things that people aren't thinking of. Warmth in the middle of the winter. Go to the basement. You'll be fine for a while if you have food and water. You can keep that place warmer down there too because of the ambient temperature of the earth itself. Can't stay alive up in a house on the second floor in the middle of winter. Not going to happen. But again, the delivery systems that are going to be so affected by any of these CME, any kind of Carrington events. And you have to wonder, is it going to be a pulsed event or is it going to be just one single particle charge that comes down? And which side of the planet is it on? And how long is the duration of the event? Is anything hardened against this? They could have spent the billions of dollars to harden our grids in the United States, and instead they decided to go use that for other choices of how they spent the cash instead of using something to protect our own nation. It just I don't understand why they didn't spend that minute amount of money to, at least try to harden our own electrical grids in the United States. And I know Canada's no better either. And then you look down in Mexico, Central America, how badly would they be affected? What are their grid situation like? Europe, a little bit better, but still. But then we get over to places like China and Russia. They're absolutely fixing and pinging and hardening everything against these CMEs. And it goes right back in with, not only are they getting ready with the colder conditions, with the icebreakers, the snow buggies, the military getting ready for cold weather, underground cities, and getting people ready to move underground with preparations. They have no less than 5,000 underground bunkers in each city. And, that's in Russia. And they've been doing this for, like 5-7 years or so, at least say up to 10. But again, at the same time, the way they're trying to protect their electrical grids against some damage is what we're not doing back in the States or other places across, even Australia is not doing it. They're trying to move everything over into renewables. Talk about those 1.2 or 1.5 megawatt or 2 megawatt wind turbines out there. How susceptible are those things to one of these CMEs? It just goes on and on and on. What about the satellites? China's throwing that quantum satellite network up there. And I know you don't like cryptocurrency, but I want to talk about satellites, not really crypto so much. But the quantum satellite network that they're putting up there apparently is hardened to 10 times something from the Carrington event. Like, they're already planning for these events. Like, why would the Chinese engineers design a satellite system to withstand something that's at least 10 times what an output of a Carrington event was, based on the energy output of what was known during that time in the 1800s? Why would they build something to withstand 10x of that? And this is the primary system they're going to be used for blockchain transmission. But you can see how vulnerable we are on so many fronts. And again, nobody's talking about it. It's just like, hey, watch your television program, watch a sports event, cool, hang out, have another beer, don't worry about it, it's all good. But it's not all good, actually. Lee?
All right, so as far as vehicles that will operate, most cars and pickup trucks produced prior to 1988 in the United States will still run. As far as in Europe, in Russia, any car, some cars still in Russia because they don't have as many computers and so on and so forth on their cars over there like we do over here, will still run. Russia still produces tubes for their radio equipment and still produces tubes in their military radio equipment and uses tubes in their stuff in preparation for CME types of events. And so they still readily use that 1950s technology even today. As far as tractor trailers being able to move goods, any truck that has a mechanical fuel pump as opposed to an electronic fuel pump will still run. As far as trains, any diesel electric locomotive that does not have a slip system on it to prevent wheel slip. So in locomotives, you would say like you would have a GP38 or an SD38 EMD locomotive. If it was just a standard SD or GP38 and not a -2, that locomotive would still run. If it was a -2 or any of the new mainline locomotives that are all computer controlled, they would not. So some freight would move, and the types of locomotives that would apply to would be in a local train, the older looking locomotives that you saw from the 70s that are still used today by major freight lines for local trains. They would still be able to move freight, but they would be very, very limited. They would probably be, down to 10 or 20% of their normal capacity as far as locomotives to move the materials. The larger problem would be the ATCS, Advanced Train Control System, or the PTCS, which is the Positive Train Control System that's being implemented now, and the communications network for that, because that's done through satellites. So that's how they would do all of their signaling and changing switches and so on and so forth for the railroads. So they're going to be pretty much blacked out conditions and would have to operate in blacked out conditions. They would be able to operate under those conditions, and they would probably be pretty successful at it because they would only be able to move about 10% of the freight anyway, because that's all the locomotives that they have. And so the tracks would be wide open for them to be able to do that. So they would be at about 10 to 20% of capacity at best, depending upon which railroad that you would check. In most cases, I would think Class A or Class 1 railroads like Union Pacific and BNSF and railroads like that would be hurt worse than smaller railroads because they have a much larger inventory of the newer locomotives, whereas that these smaller local railroads have much higher prevalence of the older locomotives that wouldn't have that type of advanced technology for traction control within the locomotive. Basically, all commercial aircraft would be grounded, and anything that would be airborne at the time of the event would come straight down like a rock, totally uncontrollable. And that would go for some of these advanced helicopters as well that have fly-by-wire. Anything that is fly-by-wire would not be flying after a Carrington-type event, or if so, not for long, and it surely wouldn't be on a flat and level trajectory. So there's, a lot of things would go down, computer systems in factories, computer systems, and that is the worst thing that I have the greatest concern about, and that is the way that we bring the goods in from the field and the way we plan it in the field. The agricultural industry is so automated and sophisticated and using computer systems for planting, for all of the application of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, for bringing the crop in with the combines and so on and so forth. All of that is all computer controlled. Every single one of those tractors has a highly sophisticated computer system in it. And the moment that you have a Carrington type event that is a significant one, there is a huge potential to lose all of those computer systems. And every single one of those systems will go down and will not be back online for years to come. So all of the wheat, all of the corn, everything that uses a large, newer technology harvesting device, be it a tractor, a combine, a picker, what have you, and everything that is controlled by GPS, and the tractors themselves that even move the buggies in and out of the fields, they will all go down. Any tractor that is produced past 1988 has electronics on board to control something, whether it be the 3-point hitch on the back, the PTO, what have you. It basically renders the tractor useless. And even if it has a mechanical fuel pump as opposed to having an electronic fuel pump, you can start the tractor, that's great, but it won't move. The transmission won't engage, the PTO won't turn on, so you have no control over the vehicle, or tractor in any way, shape, or form. And that's what will happen to all of the newer electronics. They either won't start, or if they do start, they won't move. So there will be an abundance of fuel for a short period of time because, again, all of the refineries, they're all computer controlled. All of the communication systems that say, hey, you need to pick up fuel over here and take it over there for the just-in-time delivery, that'll all be gone. The same thing goes for the grocery stores. They won't have just-in-time delivery. They won't be getting any groceries whatsoever. And most grocery stores or cities only have anywhere from a 3 to a 7-day supply of food on hand within that city. What do people do after the 7 days is up? And then as for, of course, how do you drink water when there's no electric pumps to pump the water or to do any of the cleaning to the water or water treatment prior to going into the water system itself? You don't have the electric pumps. Great, they got tanks for gravity feed, but they're only going to run until they go dry, and then you don't have water. That's why I am speaking so highly of windmill technology in the form of aeromotor as far as getting water out of the ground. And that will be required after a Carrington event. If you don't have a hand pump, a spring, or a windmill, or something of that nature, you're not going to have any water to drink because there isn't enough of it stored. And so that is a primary concern. And people go, oh, I've got a filter straw and I've got this, that, and the other. Yeah, that's great. For how long? We're talking about this as being something that can last anywhere from a few years to decades after a Carrington event with today's technology. And so if you're not prepared to deal with that and do that for the duration, that's when you're going to have the problem. This isn't weekend at Bernie's that you're just going to go out for the weekend and have a good time and come back. It's all going to be over. when a Carrington event transpires, it will be over. And you better be prepared for it, because if you're not, you're going to suffer just like everybody else. And I always think back to the photograph I saw of the richest man in Japan after the big earthquake that they had in Japan. And he was walking down the street in a tattered suit, begging for a bottle of water to drink. And so that just goes to show you, it doesn't matter who you are. When these devastating events hit where you are, you're a nobody unless you have prepared for yourself. Because like I said, Uncle Sam ain't going to knock on the door and say, hey, we're here to help. And you were talking about earlier about the U.S. government wasn't doing anything to prepare for the New Madrid or any of the other fault lines that have a high probability of going off during this event within the continental United States. DHS has done reports on the devastation and how bad it would be. And my thought on that is the reason that they're not doing anything to prepare is simply because, one, they don't exactly know where to put all of that. Two, those are assets that are tied up in those preparations. And three, they don't really even know what they're going to need or where they're going to need it. And then the fourth is they're of the idea of, we've got the rest of the United States and the rest of the world that we can draw off of. We'll just bring the assets in when we need them. And so that is my understanding of how they are putting it together. As far as when it does hit, they're just going to bring in anything and everything from wherever they can get it and deal with that event. As far as the devastation that will cause, from the reports that I have read, and there's been numerous reports done on what the effects of that would be, and that's been done by the U.S. Geological Survey, by DHS, and so on and so forth, as well as some states have actually done studies. Basically, if you wanted to go from the east part of the country to the west part of the country or vice versa via roadway, you would be going across down along New Orleans, or you would be going across up near Chicago, because all of the bridges in between those two locations would pretty much be in the water.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.